UFC Fight Night in Brazil. It's going down. It's still happening. While the rest of the sports world is on hold, the UFC is still going on. To talk more about it, ESPN MMA reporter Brett Okamoto joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Brett, how you doing on this Saturday?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. So, listen, I think the big question a lot of people want to know, and I think a lot of people are curious about, is how is it that the UFC can go forward with their fights, as Dana White said the other night on SportsCenter, but yet the rest of the world has been put on pause?
I mean, there's a few different ways you could answer that. I think you start with, this company is run by Dana White, and it takes its lead from Dana White, and Dana is a defiant guy. I mean, anybody who has followed the sport or is familiar with him knows that. And so I think he, as the commissioner of this thing, if you want to relate it to other sports, he's just more geared towards, no, we're not shutting down our business. We're not going to live our lives that way. So that's the start of it, is that you have a leader like that who has that sort of mentality. And then I think as you go further, you can see that this company believes that it can continue to keep its athletes safe. Whether or not that's true, I guess we're going to find out because they're going to move forward with it. And they have a bunch of athletes who are independent contractors, who are adults, and who are saying, the company has made it clear. They've told their fighters, if you feel uncomfortable with this, then don't compete. It will not be held against you. There won't be punitive measures. If you don't want to compete anymore, then let us know. And these guys want to fight. I have talked to a lot of fighters over the last 2 days, and these guys do want to continue to compete. So it's kind of a complicated answer for you, but I think those sort of key points are what's allowing this to continue.
Well, it may be a complicated answer, Brett, but I think that, people need to understand the nuances, because I think that, because of all the media focus has been on the other sports like the NBA and the NHL, the XFL, all these other names out there that, now the UFC, is being elevated from an ESPN Plus broadcast to main ESPN television. And I think that it's important for people to understand, I don't think there's as many diehard fans as they are, regular, casual, mainstream MMA fans right now. And I think that this is a great opportunity for people to learn more about the UFC and how it works and the functionality of its athletes.
For sure, and I definitely am not naive enough to think that hasn't factored into the equation. I think that they like the idea of being the only sport in town, but I will say that I think that this would have happened anyway. Had some other leagues continued, or a couple of them had shut down, or whatever the case was. Dana White is the type of guy, again, to just go back to him, and he is where the buck stops. He's a guy who makes his own rules and marches to the beat of his own drum, and so, regardless of what was going on with the other leagues, I think them all shutting down, that definitely put a little bit of pressure on the UFC that maybe we need to really look hard at shutting down. But at the end of the day, kind of independent of anything else that was going on, Dana White says, as long as I can put on fights, I'm going to put on fights. And he believes he has the infrastructure there, especially once we get past Brazil and once we get past London next week. The UFC is moving all of their cards. They've already moved one from Columbus. They moved one from Portland. They're going to happen in Las Vegas, and that's where the headquarters is. That's where their building is, where they have a cage. They feel like they have a situation there that they have full control over. And we'll see if they're right. But that's going to be Dana White's mentality, is that until the government literally shuts him down, he's going to continue to try promoting.
Yeah, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but we do know that the WWE is doing the same thing with their events. They moved it to their Performance Center in Orlando. So, there is an understanding that if in a controlled environment, it's obviously a lot easier to control a lot of this. Brett, can you speak to the audience a little bit about the medical testing that goes into the pre-fight for a lot of these fighters? Because I don't think a lot of people understand how many layers of medical testing that these athletes have to go through just to be able to get to fight night.
Yeah, so even in the time that we're not in now, under normal times, these guys come in and they have blood tests. They have obviously, EKGs on their hearts. They go through, some physical tests for a while now in Las Vegas. They've even been going through these mental tests as part of a brain study from the Cleveland Clinic. So, they're obviously And it kind of varies, honestly, from commission to commission. Some commissions are a little more strict than others. Some commissions, if they see something that they're uncomfortable with, like New York is really sort of notorious for, if they see any type of blip on a CAT scan. Some of these fighters have been able to fight in Nevada, but if they come to New York, so it does vary slightly. But by and large, that's what you're looking at. It is a full physical, and it does include blood tests and the whole 9 yards. I mean, they want to make sure that these guys are healthy and they don't have contagious, infections that are going to that they're going to give to their opponent.
Is it fair to say that the UFC, with their policies, and the athletic commissions with their policies, that this sport is a more exhaustive medical checking and double check than possibly the other professional sports?
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say so. I mean, again, it kind of varies depending on what state you go to. Some states are really better than others. Some athletic commissions, if they go to a state that just does not hold a lot of combat sports, that they're going to be a little bit behind in terms of, if you come to Las Vegas or California, where they're having, hundreds of thousands of fights per year. But by and large, yes, they want. They know that this is a dangerous sport, right? And they know this is a sport of very, very close contact. So they want physicians to check out these athletes and make sure that they are good to go. But I will say that there are some stories, and I'm sure that there are some stories in every league, where some of these athletic commissions are a little lagging behind, and guys can't get by with some medical issues. But I mean, that's a complicated question you're asking with a lot of layers. But yes,
Sure.
I mean, I do think that the sport in general does a fairly good job of testing its athletes and just generally for general health and for contagious diseases and things of that nature before they get in, especially at the level of the UFC.
Brett Okamoto joining us here on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow on Twitter at @BOkamoto ESPN. Brett, you mentioned that you've spoken to numerous athletes recently. Can you just convey to the audience a little bit about, what those athletes are telling you? What are the UFC, athletes, the people who are the ones actually going out there and having to risk themselves, not just for the fans, but for their own livelihoods? What the feelings of those athletes are.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and of course there are exceptions to every situation. But if I had to characterize it from a general sense, these guys don't think about it, and if you really kind of dig into that, it does make sense. I mean, these guys, the profession that they have chosen, and the profession that they do love, is a profession of putting yourself in harm's way. I mean, they are just sort of conditioned to do that, and they're also very good at tunnel vision. I mean, these guys, when they get into camp and they know that they have to train twice a day, which is very, very hard, and it's not just the type of training that they do. I mean, they're sparring. They're putting their body through a lot. They have injuries that they're having to fight through. They're cutting weight, so they're actually limiting their caloric intake while they're doing these 2 to 3 workouts a day. I mean, they have no other mental capacity for anything else. Like they try to eliminate a lot of the other stresses in their life. So amazingly, man, when I talk to some of these guys, they haven't really thought much about the coronavirus. They haven't really given it a whole lot of thought because they're in laser focus on the task at hand. Now, what will be interesting is if this continues and this period of inactivity in sports is longer than we all want it to be, well, then what will happen? Are these guys going to want to continue to sign up for fights when they're not laser focused yet? They're out of camp, and they're thinking to themselves, well, now I have to get into camp. I have to go to a gym. I have to be around a lot of people in close proximity. I have to roll around the mats and hit pads with people. Will they want to continue to sign up for fights then? I actually think that they will. I think that they will continue. But from the athletes that I've talked to who have fights scheduled over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they want to fight because they've been in camp and they're ready to go. They're in shape. They've made sacrifices. They want their paycheck. So all these guys want to fight right now, and they really haven't given a whole lot of thought to the coronavirus.
Looking down the road, you mentioned the next several events. Obviously you have Brazil today, you have London, then you have back at the UFC their own controlled environment in Las Vegas. But then you have the big one. You have Khabib, you have Ferguson, New York. If everything goes well, if there's no other tests, there's no positive tests, there's the world is finally getting back to some normalcy, could we then still see Khabib and Tony in New York, or do you think it's fair to assume that the more likely option is even that super pay-per-view might have to be moved to the controlled environment in Las Vegas.
It's impossible to tell right now, just because the UFC is not going to make that decision before it has to. And what I mean by that is they want to see if things start to get better. And if they start to get better in a short, in the near future, then they're going to do everything they can to preserve that fight in New York. And if the state of New York, lifts the ban on these large gatherings, and they can have like their first pay-per-view after coming out of this coronavirus where things are going back to normal, and it can be that fight, I mean, that would be a great scenario for them. Now, if it continues over the next few weeks where things are not getting better or hopefully not worse, then they're going to have some real conversations to be had. I know that right now the feeling is it's very defiant. We are going to continue these fights, and everybody wants to see Khabib versus Tony. And by putting it in the small facility in Las Vegas, yeah, you're losing a massive gate. You really are. But you are also driving a lot of interest that could be, monetized on pay-per-view. So I could see them doing a few different things. I could see them just postponing the fight and saying, this is too big of a fight. We need the gate. We want to have it in front of the fans. We're just going to push it back a few months. Or I could see them, I definitely could see a situation in which they're like, this fight is the fifth time we tried to book it.
Right.
We're having these fights in Vegas. We've gotten a few under our belt. We feel comfortable with the way that's going. We are going to bring that major fight to an empty, small arena in Vegas. That would be pretty wild, but I could definitely see it as a possibility.
Brett, a couple more for you, and appreciate your time today. I want to ask you about the fights are going on today, and I want to start with Kevin Lee and Charles Oliveira, because this is not the first time Kevin Lee has not met weight, and you can correct me, but I believe this is the fourth or fifth time he has missed weight at lightweight. So, where is his career right now? I mean, if he cannot make 155, and if he loses another fight down here, he's already fought at welterweight before. What is his career trajectory as a guy who a lot of people thought was a rising star, and then he had a couple losses in a row? He's kind of in an interesting situation right now.
Yeah, he is. I mean, I think that he's going to do what he can to stay at 55. I mean, certainly it would help if he won the fight. If he loses this fight, then I don't know if it changes everything for him and it forces him to go to welterweight, but it's much better for him if he can say he won the fight, and then he can turn around and say, hey, I was down in Brazil. It was a crazy week. It was not a normal week by any stretch of imagination. Cutting weight in Brazil is hard as it is. I mean, I've had multiple guys from the United States tell me that it's just hard to get some of the things that you need. It's hard to find some of the different things, whether it be a sauna or a hot bath or the salts or whatever they need in order to cut weight. It's just different going down to Brazil than it is if you're cutting weight here in Las Vegas. So I think people will forgive him if he says hey, this was one of the most insane weeks in sports. I'm sorry I missed weight, but there were things that were out of my control. If he wins the fight, I think people will forgive him pretty quickly. If he goes out and loses, he's kind of in a spot where he was, a fight or two fights back, where it's like, well, where does this guy go? I mean, he's constantly talked about the need for a 165-pound weight class. The UFC is not anywhere near introducing a 165-pound weight class. So unfortunately for Kevin Lee, he is only 28, so I think that he can find his foothold somewhere, but he's really locked in that identity of a guy who is stuck between weight classes at that point, if he loses this fight.
And the co-main event is the other fight I'm very interested in watching, because Damian Maia, he's 42 years old. He's arguably still not the best. He's still one of the greatest grapplers in all of MMA. And he's on a 3-fight winning streak. Before that, he lost 3 straight fights, but that was against arguably the 3 best welterweights on the planet right now. So, he's a betting underdog today in Brazil, which is his home country. Obviously, there's going to be no fans there, but, where is the situation for his career?
Yeah, I mean, when the other day when Vince Carter came in and just hit a 3-pointer, and it was sort of a meaningless 3-pointer, but everyone was really excited about it because, hey, it was Vince Carter, was a legend. He came into the game. That it didn't really matter. The game was in hand at that point, and then he pops a 3. I kind of see that as where Damian Maia is. This guy's not going to win a championship. He's not going to be in a fight that is really, really, really strongly dictating, who gets the next title shot or not. I mean, it hasn't been that long in which he was. And like you said, he is on a 3-fight win streak. So I don't want to say that, the guy is washed up. He's not by any means. But he's just not at a point in his career where he's going to greatly influence what happens in that 170-pound division. He's been upfront about that. He knows it. So, I think his career has turned into these situations where let him fight in Brazil. Let him fight a guy like Gilbert Burns, who is very talented on the ground as well. It should be a fun stylistic matchup, and it's just one of those fights where so much. And this is what's good about the UFC is that a lot of the fights that we watch, it has impact. It has, is this prospect going to take the next step? Is this, guy in the top 15 going to break the top 10? There's a structure to it, and that's what makes every fight feel like it matters, and it makes it, interesting to watch. But in this case, it's just like, let's just watch Damian Maia do his thing in Brazil. I think that's the point in his career that he's at, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon if he continues to keep on fighting.
And the other fighter on this card that I think a lot of people should be tuning in to watch, tell the audience about one of the most intriguing athletes in the world right now, and that'd be Johnny Walker.
Yeah. The light heavyweight division, which is 205 pounds, which is the division that John Jones has been reigning over for basically 10 years now at this point, just about. It's kind of been emptied. John Jones went through and just demolished everybody that anybody knew about, the Rampage Jacksons, the Leon Machitas, the Rashad Evans. He wasted all of them, and then it was like, man, who is this guy going to fight? And it's taken some time to sort of identify these guys who are coming up and they're new and they're like fresh blood, right? Well, Johnny Walker, even though he lost to Corey Anderson in his last fight, he's one of those guys. He's a freak athlete. He's fearless. He's young. He's still in his 20s. And he's still developing. I wouldn't want to put him in there with John Jones tomorrow, but this guy has one-punch knockout power. And he's just got that athleticism, man. I mean, a lot of times when we watch John Jones fight anybody, we're like, man, this guy is just fighting such an uphill battle because they're just not the athlete that John Jones is. Johnny Walker is that type of athlete where he gets in the octagon and you'll be like, man, this is athletically, these guys are on the same playing field, and that's exciting. So if this guy can figure it out and can continue to develop and continue to get better and get some experience, he's going to be a guy that, myself and a lot of other people who follow the sport really want to see get a title shot and potentially challenge John Jones.
Again, folks can watch all of it today live on ESPN television. You can see Kevin Lee versus Charles Oliveira, Maia versus Burns, Johnny Walker as well. And, of course, the prelims as well on ESPN. You can see it all on television today. So if you're hunkering down for some action, for some sports, the UFC's got you covered, and Brett Okamoto always has you covered. Give him a follow on Twitter at @BOkamotoESPN for all of your ESPN, UFC, and MMA coverage. Brett, really appreciate the time today and giving the audience some more information about everything that's been going on.
Yeah, no problem, Josh. You got it.